Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to the Future Business Forum number 8. 8. That's a record in itself. We're never going to see 8 again, but this is the first time we've done an 8. So welcome to Rachel, welcome to Brian, and I'm Tristan. I think you know who we are now, and if you don't, you can find our bios in previous episodes, and we'll do it again later on. But for today, we're going to leap into a subject that we started off at the end of our last episode, where we tried to come up with themes separately, and having just discussed it offline this morning, suddenly, because we think in a similar way possibly, we find a theme. And the theme is around decision making, and what leads to decision, and the paralysis, the inertia that we currently see people suffering from when it comes to decision making for the fear of getting it wrong. So we're going to have a conversation around that for half an hour or so, and I'll kick the ball into Rachel's room, bounce it off that book of walls behind you, and let's start the conversation going.
Yeah, so my 3 is around the paralysis of decision making. So the first one is be kind. We've got to be kind to each other and to ourselves, because it's a huge period of uncertainty and you don't know what people's personal stories are. So just be kind. Second is to be curious, to really understand. Tristan, you talked about this before, that if we keep reading from the same sources, we don't challenge our thinking, and our thinking isn't challenged. So talk to different people, just really understand different points of views. And the third one for me is being comfortable at making mistakes. Those who move forward will keep making mistakes, but if they're kind to themselves, if they're curious, they'll keep. So it's a mistake, that's fine, let's move forward. If you're leading an organization and that's the culture you're setting, there'll be lots of innovation and creativity, and some will work and some won't, but it's better than staying still or drifting when actually your competitors or disruptors are actually moving forward. So they're my 3 areas.
Brian.
And I love all of those. I mean, this is the Future Business Forum, and the way people are thinking about how they're going to move forward into the future right now. There are some that are very clear and in terms of the people we've been talking to, but there are quite a lot are not. And those 3 things you just said, Rachel, are absolutely key in people like us helping people like them move forward. When I thought about my 3, I was you typically are thinking about the customer. I was thinking more about how we can be more impactful given the circumstances there are now. People are finding it very hard to make a decision, very hard to see past the current circumstance. As Trish said, there's a bit of inertia, there's a bit of paralysis, as they're working hard at what they're trying to do, in terms sometimes just in surviving, and they're not opening their minds up. They're not, maybe haven't got the bandwidth to do that. So I was thinking more about how we can impact the thing. So we haven't traveled at all to any. Well, I think we've had 3 business meetings in the last 6 months, and most of those were local people we know very, very well, and it hasn't made any impact on our new business or the business at all. In fact, it's made us more efficient, I think. And I think that this not so much traveling, but only having the face-to-face. I miss the face-to-face dreadfully, but just doing that when it's necessary, I think is something we will continue to do, and I think a lot of people will. The other 2 are to do with efficiency. Rachel was talking about being kind and being curious, not being worried about making mistakes. What we've been finding is that people are coming to us when they're asking us to help, and they've already got a picture that they've painted, if you like. And sometimes that picture is painting something which, if we followed that lead, we could, if we did what we normally did, we could it'd be good for us financially But actually, we've gone on at least 3 occasions, we've gone to them and said, actually, we don't think that's the right thing to do once we've done all the strategy work. And we've impressed upon them what we believe is the right thing to do. And in one case in particular, it meant we didn't do anything for them. And I think that's important right now too, to be morally correct, to look at something and do the right thing rather than the thing that would make us money, because I think they will remember that. We've said in previous conversations here, people remember when you do the right thing rather than the thing that, there are several very famous people who will not do very well in the fallout of the COVID-19 thing because the way they behaved at the time. And the last one again was about efficiency. We're talking about how other people are going to behave going forward. We've been thinking about that ourselves and looking at how we do things. Forever, 3 of us are consultants, and people pay us to do things as quickly as we can. And we found that the way we've been working, the way we put things together, the technology we're using isn't necessarily as efficient as it could have been. And there's been a whole honing of various things so that we can act quickly. There's an old phrase, speed stuns. And I think it's beholden, particularly now, for people like us to come up with a solution as quickly as possible so that the people we're working with can get on with can understand where they might be going. The curiosity is still there in terms of what Rachel was saying, but we can do it more efficiently. And I think that's really crucial, particularly now. So those were my 3.
Yeah, and mine kind of crossed over with both of yours because they started off by me. This is not a new drum I bang, I'm afraid. It's just become a little bit more apposite as COVID struck. And my opinion or my perspective is that lots of companies that we work and try and work with are really stuck in March. They haven't moved on at all in the last 6 months, 7 months, because, as Rachel started off by saying, they just don't know what to do next. But in doing that, of course, their staff are still sitting at home wondering when they're going to go back, who's going to be chosen to stay in, who can go in and meet, who's important enough to go in and meet. Is that still a thing? So being aware of the environment that you're working in is really important. And the second thing I wanted to talk about was the need to dig a bit deeper and read more broadly. Again, I've said it before, but I'll say it again. If a company that makes widgets only ever reads trade journals about widgets, that's what they'll know. But if they learn about knitting and yachts and sheep shearing, I don't know, it's possible that something may drop out of that, which they would never have had a thought about. And the third thing is do something. Decisioning is really, really important. And by doing the first 2 things, being aware and digging deeper, you probably can get to a decision. Now, if you're not afraid of a decision, not afraid of trying something different, then you become the guys that Google and Apple would like you to be when they say, build fast, break quickly, or build fast, break fast. And I think this is where people are. The economic climate is so disrupted at the moment. No one knows, or very few companies know, where the next buck is coming from. If it's not from a loan or a grant, that they just are a bit atrophied, if that's a word. And I think we can help them get out of that rut if we're allowed to. And as Brian said, it's not all about selling a service. It's just about being honest sometimes and taking a third party perspective to the conversation. And there are lots of people like us that claim to do that. And I'm sure there are much better as well out there somewhere. Don't know any of them, of course. But if you're a big company, you will rely on McKinsey or Anderson, or not Anderson, whatever they're called now, PA perhaps. And if you're a smaller company, maybe you'll come to someone like us. But again, those conversations need a nucleator. And so many of the situations that I find myself in with the team here is that it's all about getting back to what was rather than moving on to what can be and what will be successful.
I was working with a company last year who some of the directors wanted to change their working style. So they had people working from home. It's a very traditional company. And the managing director wasn't keen on working from home, wanted to have very traditional in the office. So I carried out work, which was talking to all the staff, doing interviews, surveys, working out what the recommendations were, which was, let's try working from home one day a week. Let's do core hours. Tweaked a few other things. So they were put in place with everyone in agreement. 3 months later, it was reviewed. Still, the traditional, generally the older members of staff were still not comfortable. And then COVID hit. And so they went home. They were all set up with their laptops, went home that night, and were back on a team meeting at 9:30 the next morning. No break in business at all. And I was talking to the managing director a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying the best thing that ever happened, because he had his mindset challenged, because he was curious and he was making the decision to change their style of working. When COVID hit, it was fine, and they could keep adjusting. But it also challenged his mindset that actually, if we could challenge how they work, then can they challenge other parts of their business to then really drive it forward and say, well, that's what we know, but is that actually relevant anymore? So they just tore everything up and just went through everything step by step to work out. So they're now, they weren't offering a digital platform before, but they are now, and they've worked during lockdown with another company to really get that moving forward. So now their offerings, 12 months on from when they first started talking to me just about how they work, is so much bigger, and the benefits are much greater for them, and their business is growing, and they're now differentiating from their competitors because they've just gone, well, let's just go with it. Let's do something different. Let's try something new, because I've already been challenged once. So let's challenge myself to keep doing that throughout the business, which I think is a great story.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because the other important element with curiosity is open-mindedness. You can be really curious, but if you come up against something which you think is not going to work because your mind isn't open to it, it doesn't matter how curious you are, you will never act on it. So that particular MD is obviously has the right balance of both. The other thing that we found has been a bit of a catalyst to help people see past their atrophy, using Tristan's word, is when you say to them, no, you may be in this position here, but if you reached out to some of your partners, some of the people you work with who are all in the same place, you might find that if you combine your services, if you think about that in a different way, you end up with a different thing. You end up with a much more powerful thing. So use your ecosystem to be, we've said this for years, but at this moment is very important. And two of the three I mentioned earlier have done that. And that was how one of them didn't actually work with us at all. They just went out and they found a way of working with their partners that helped them, without doing much at all, think about things differently. So I think expanding out from just yourself, think about how you can work with others, think about how you can make that ecosystem into a bigger, much more powerful offer than you can actually give yourself, and how you could then market it. I think that's happening. We've seen that several times.
Well, I'd like to talk about a particular example of this, actually, but taking it from the other end. So as an innovation consultancy, we always ask people to look ahead, and they find it really hard to do that. But in the last week, we've seen a couple of things, massive things happen, and they haven't been reported terribly widely at all. And the first thing, not quite so major, this one, but the first thing was that the UK government announced that they were going to restrict new car sales of fossil fuel power cars to 2030. So after 2030, no new petrol and diesel cars are sold. Okay, that's improvement on the previous figure by about 2 years, but it's a step in the right direction. And last month, given that we're in the first week of October now, China announced that they were going to do something massive in terms of their carbon generation. So 85% of the power generated in China is coal powered, and they produce 28% of the carbon dioxide that the world produces. So as much as the US, Europe, and India combined, almost. Now, you think about that, and it sounds like such a big number and such a big deal that, you know, why does it matter to me? Because I make widgets down the road, or I'm a lawyer in Milton Keynes or whatever. But it does. The time frame on this is that by 2030 they will have gone through peak power, I think they called it, or peak CO2, and by 2060 they'll be carbon neutral. Okay, so it's not that far away, really. In the people that are successing us in business, they'll still be in post. This is one career generation that we're talking about. Now, what China does usually affects everybody else. So if China's going to be reducing its consumption or its generation of carbon dioxide, it probably means it's going to be not mining coal, not using coal power generators in the same way they do today in a few decades' time. And all the other things they make, all those products, they're like plastics, like, I can't even think of a better example now, but will be affected. And the world supply will be changing as well. For a company today to latch on to that seam of thought, using a coal analogy there, and bringing it back to what they make today could be really, really useful and very, very interesting. And by being first into market, or amongst the first into market with a thing that meets the demand of the new market, of course, you've got a chance of winning out in the same way that Facebook and Apple did back when they were still new. So I think that awareness, that being aware, that being open to new ideas, not closing it off, being prepared to talk it through, work it through, and actually make a decision on the back of that is what innovation and design thinking has always been about. But if COVID has done one thing for us, it's made us all think very differently about the way we interact with each other in the workplace and with our customers. And it's given us the opportunity to be more expansive in our thinking. And I do agree that not as many people are doing that as they could do, because they're still trying to get back to March, but the opportunity is there. The environment, the environment within which change can occur is now much more advanced than it was 6 months ago. That's a really good thing.
Yes, the opportunity although financially people may be struggling, I think the opportunity to grasp that future is easier now, or is within grasp easier now, I think. But I still think Rachel's thing about curiosity and not worrying about making a mistake is going to be crucial to people making decisions. The other thing, interesting, I think the China thing is absolutely huge, and they seem to be making a lot of decisions in China at the moment to highlight the fact that the US are pretty atrophied in terms of making similar decisions, just because their economy is flying and so on. And I really hope they mean what they say about that, what they're trying to do by 2060, because that would be marvelous. But and again, there's me not being very trusting, and trust, I think, is another interesting thing here. No, it isn't quite on subject, but I was reading over the weekend in the New York Times, who gives a very interesting look at the way they think about the Brits. And they're talking about how trust in what people say and what people are pointing at in the future is really important. And it's interesting how they felt there's a lack of trust in the UK, less trust than there has been in the past, particularly since we've got a government who seems to be happy with defying international law at the moment. We've got a government in the States that has been against the norm in total. So they just aren't been doing things in the normal way. So this think of trust. And there was a thing on the TV this morning about how more people in the UK are doing their own thing with regard to COVID-19. They're being less stringent with the rules because the rules are less stringent. And again, there's this sort of do it my way, I can't trust what I'm being told. And I think that lack of governance, that lack of direction doesn't help all of us in terms of how we make decisions. And it makes this being comfortable making mistakes and trusting in your curiosity, I think, a little bit harder.
I think it has the potential to make it not easier, but it allows for the potential to be more of what a company does to be more impactful.
Yeah, absolutely.
It sort of brings into the old Red Sea, Blue Ocean thing, where if you launch into a Red Sea, there's a lot of activity, a lot of noise. That's where the market is, but there's so many competitors that the price is probably lower, and that probably is what China's going to do, inflict on most of the world economies because when it gets into things like alternative power generation, wind farms and solar panels, the unit cost of all those things will drop through the floor, and they'll be much more reachable. So so that Red Sea is going to expand. But the Blue Ocean thing, you probably don't launch into that because there aren't so many people looking into that space for your solution. And yet when they do and find you, you'll stand out, and the cost is higher. And I just thinking about this analogy, if I was going to launch a new cereal, for example, I think I would try and get Waitrose to put it in amongst the coffee or the frozen peas, because that's kind of where you would get noticed on the cereal aisle. It's just one of many. But that's not the normal that you were just talking about. Positioning at the moment is whatever you want your position to be, it's up for grabs. You can promote something in a very unusual way if you know that the market is moving in your direction as well, and take a lead in the messaging that goes into that market. And I think that's really, really exciting. But I don't see many companies doing it. And even the best ones, and there are lots of good ones, cereal companies like Kellogg's, for example, they've got a great R&D innovation training platform you can go and tap into as an external, I think. But companies aren't doing it. They're relying on their own knowledge of their markets to lead them through this. And I think we need to, people like us, I'm not saying that we have all the answers, but we are there as an agent provocateur, perhaps, and we can be useful in that way.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's to do with leadership as well. So if you've got the leaders at the top, if they really do drive the culture of it's okay to make mistakes, and we'll celebrate you making mistakes and we'll say thank you for trying, then people will start to do it. Because if you're further down the organization, you don't really want to make a mistake because you could be fired. So it's for me, it's a lot around the leadership of the company, of the culture, of the brand. I think it's a massive mind shift that I think will reap huge rewards. But if you ask most people to say, go and make a mistake, not the culture we tend to live in, but I think it's where we need to go.
I'm fascinated by companies that we come into contact with, like law firms, law firms at the moment. We thought at the start of COVID that law firms would take a bit of a tumble because they wouldn't see contract law being transacted in quite the same way. But of course, what happened was that you may not have seen corporate contracts being brought to arbitration in any great numbers, but you saw lots and lots of boundary disputes because people were at home arguing about the Lalandi, and it's so there's all there are winners and losers in this. But I think as well that the technology that's being evolved while we're going through this funny period is, it always used to be the case that people who, when a technology was imposed upon an industry, it also created more jobs. And that's not true anymore. Technology being imposed on an industry, RPA, for example, that's taking someone out of the back room who usually stuffs envelopes, you put a process in place that automates that, and that job doesn't come back. And I think through COVID, we will see an element of people losing jobs permanently. And this use of technology, the land grab by technology for people's positions, I think is one to watch, because it really is having impact on where people can go back to work. I think if people are still being furloughed and possibly haven't taken it upon themselves to do something positive for their job, for their business, for their company, without being asked, that there's a possibility that they won't get to go back to work, and that's really quite concerning for the longer term economy in lots of places. I was reading this morning that the self-employed nature of work is also growing, and I think the two things I've just discussed are linked. Apparently, the over 70s now, 42% of over 70s are self-employed. Now, there's so much in that to unpack. What are over 70s doing working? Because we've always been brought up to think that you retire at 65, or 60. And that just isn't the case anymore, because the generation before us really had the best of it with their final salary pensions and their index-linked benefits and blah, blah, blah. We don't get that anymore. And the over 60s, I think the figure was 28% of over 60s are self-employed. And these are all up on previous years. So people are working longer, they have less secure job prospects. As they come into the market, the older people who are being invested in more by VCs now because they've got more life experience and more chances of succeeding, these are the disruptors that the established companies that are kicking people out are going to get hurt by, when the only way that an over 70 can get through is to start a business. So all these things are very, very interrelated, and I know it's a bit of a complex conversation to have on 3 screens. Maybe I should draw it out on a whiteboard. But I think that the ability for a company that's already trading to make a decision and to take some of these things into account is really, really limited today. And that may change, but while people are doing what Rachel described them as doing, it probably won't.
But I still think you were mentioning positioning a bit earlier. But it does take some of the curiosity that Rachel talked about. It takes some of the balls to be able to move your business in the right place. But positioning is more important than ever to stand out, and to underline whatever the difference is that you're going to make to the world. Understanding what that positioning is, and not just to the customer, but to your staff, and making sure that they understand it and they live it and breathe it and so on, is really crucial. We seem to be spending a lot of our time at the moment helping people with that, where they are, what's the positioning. A lot of people don't understand what we talk about when we say that. They've never done it before. And actually, you were talking about leadership earlier. I was on a sort of gather. I've joined this group, and the sort of senior people, and that I'm going to be with once a month, and there's sort of cohort, and the first one last week was talking about leadership, and they were talking, and the guy who was Richard Gerver, who's written a lot of books, really good guy, asked us for some examples of how we think leadership, of things that we've seen or been involved in where leadership has been different. And one of the people on the conversation, who works in a big business in Buckinghamshire, she described her business as being inverted. So if you took the normal leadership org chart, with the MD at the top and all the rest of it, in their business, it's the other way around. Because she said the people who really are customer facing are those who are on the outside. They're all the people that are working with the clients directly in her business. So I very rarely see the customer. So we invert it. So those guys are the most important. And that actually was a really interesting analogy. that they reverse the importance. It would take a lot. I know some MDs who would never do that. They'd never see that. They wouldn't feel comfortable in doing that. And because it means a real culture shift in the way you think about your business. But I thought that was quite a really refreshing look at it. And it made me think, about how other people I know could do the same sort of thing, and it would help their businesses.
Yeah, it's I think what you're talking about is servant leadership. So if you are a leader with an organization that has frontline staff, you are the servant leader, that you are there to enable the staff to do their very best, because they're the ones that serve the customer and you are there to serve them, even though you're the leader. So it's just inverted. So yeah, there's lots of different theories around that I have seen working incredibly well.
There was a experiment done not that long ago. I can't remember. I think it was Macy's that started it off in the US, where they had staff were allowed to tweet and do some social media activity on behalf of the Macy's brand, and became brand ambassadors for the business. And when I was learning the ropes back in sales, when I started in work, we were as salesmen, sales account managers, territory managers, whatever you were called, you were on the front line interacting with your customers. And out of the 250 people in a particular company, then I think I counted there were about 26 of us that actually talked to customers, sales type people. And, it just wasn't a thing that you would let anybody from purchase ledger or credit control talk to a customer's accounts departments, because they were thought that to be incapable of talking to people. And these are the same people that manage their mortgages and run kids to school and get through life quite happily, but you couldn't let them talk to a customer about a credit note. And now, of course, the communications are so different than they were 20 years ago. I don't know if it's a concept that's been fully embraced yet. The way that a customer interacts with a brand or with a business stroke brand, doesn't rely entirely on always having the positioning statement front and center. It's about how they experience the business. So you haven't got to be talking about the soft drink you sell or the packet of crisps you sell. It can be, how do we interact? What service do we provide? Where's the experience? What's the benefit in dealing with this company over somebody else? And all those experiential factors that we've been told are so important to us, and yet we don't really put a metric on them. And I say we, I mean businesses that we work with. They're very, very important factors still, and I think they're going to become more important as, again, going back to the China example, the prices in certain markets just plummet, because what those guys do will have major impact on the supply of certain things into the world markets. So none of what we talk about is discrete. Everything is interrelated to a large extent. That's why this conversation rambles a bit, I guess. But
it's true. But I also think that you made a really important point there. I think the getting the guy from the purchase ledger to be able to talk to somebody, and you show confidence that they can talk to somebody, is really crucial for the culture of a business. And the way that you can make sure that's possible is to make sure the people who work in the business have bought into the brand. They understand what the brand's about, and they buy into it. They understand the messages. They understand all that. And few businesses actually spend as much time on the internal, I wouldn't call it education, but sort of the buy-in, if you like, and listen to what the staff say, and in response to what they're trying to put across, and learn and mold the things so that everybody buys into it. That I think is absolute. That I'm seeing more of that now. People being aware of that's important. And you're right, Tristan. You shouldn't have that attitude to anybody in your business that they can't talk to a customer. That is just so old-fashioned. And some of the newer businesses that haven't got many people, everybody talks to the customer because they have to, because there's not many people there. So I think having that sort of strong love of what you do, in terms of what the business stands for, and having the right feedback. I started to say about 5 minutes ago that I'm reading a really interesting book by a guy called Scott Galloway called The Four. And he's critiquing what he calls the four horsemen, the current four horsemen, Amazon, Apple, Google, and Facebook. He says there's never been four companies like it. He wrote this book in 2018, and he was, and before that, nobody had got to $1 trillion valuation, which of course Apple made, and so did Amazon now. And he was describing why they are so powerful, and it's well worth a read. I don't like. He's a professor of marketing, so who am I to talk about? But he's a very successful guy. I don't particularly like the way he writes, but the point he's making about the four companies is really interesting, and he's got this a set of rules of why he says they are so different. Why are they more powerful than IBM ever was, or Microsoft ever was? Both of whom were really, really powerful and frightening at one point. But these four are global and endemic. And he then goes on to talk about who are the next, who's going to be the fifth horseman. Is it going to be Tesla or Uber or Airbnb? Then he goes on to talk about Walmart, who are desperately trying to, because they've got the money, to buy themselves back into that sort of online space. They've just spent a huge amount of money on the top Indian, Amazon in India. So what we're seeing in our world, the tiny businesses who are using technology and thinking about where they're positioning and all the stuff people we work with, it's going on at a huge scale as well with the people like, you can see it in British retail. They've done really. The supermarkets have done really well out of the pandemic for obvious reasons, but some did better than others. Asda is stronger now than it was in March. Sainsbury's is less strong, and it comes down to relationships. It comes down to how we feel, like you said a bit earlier about these people.
Can I ask you a question, Rachel? When we talk about people that get brought into companies, you get exemplars held up of having someone that's come into business and made significant difference, and I don't know, names like Sheryl Sandberg, and I can't think of a better example at the moment, but they come in, they make a difference, and they go away again, and they set a culture for a period of time, and then everybody follows it. And then there's the other way of doing it, which is a phrase I've used before, which is if you want to know why you do what you do, ask the people you trained. And I just wonder if we're seeing a shift away from companies buying in people to train, and moving more towards buying in people that can make instant impact in a different direction, so the company changes by their employment.
Well, I think it's a good question. I think it depends on the industry and the culture of that company. So there'll be some companies where you just want to make the quick hit and just keep moving forward, whereas others, their brand is on trust, and they're reliable, and they're always there to help. And I think it depends on the product, on the service, as to what is best. I'm pausing because I'm not sure what the world will look like as to what will be the preferred option, if that makes sense. I think people need to be bold and brave and lead from the top and say, right, we're going to be brave and say it's okay to make mistakes, and we're going to celebrate that, even though it goes against everything in me, because I've always been so cautious. I think youth in nature will always be much greater with risk, because as the older you get, the more you realise, or the more you think, I'm not prepared to lose it. So I think definitely with the younger generations, get them in, but be prepared to reward what you want, the behaviours you want.
Do you think that the thing I said just now about the older generations, the older decades being more valued because they've got more life experience? So I think the average age of a successful VC funded startup is about 45 now. So there are a lot more older people and younger people too, obviously, but there's more imperative amongst older people to be self-sufficient. Now, that doesn't help large companies because they go off and do their own thing and become disruptors and competitors. I just wonder if, well, that old phrase, again, sorry to use a cliche, but I think it's for the board usually sees 4% of the problems that a company has, this iceberg of ignorance. So all the people at the bottom of the pyramid can see everything going wrong, and the guys at the top, not so much. So how do you permeate that structure to get the best out of everybody?
But I think that comes back to culture again. So if I've spent a lot of time at Dell, and it's owner-led by Michael Dell, and so it was very traditional in how it was run. And then we started to get millennials in, and one millennial sent a note directly to Michael Dell to say, this is what's working well and this is what is not. And the repercussions were in the community at Dell, like, oh, wow, that shouldn't have happened. And oh my God, and do we need to discipline the individual? Whereas the response from Michael was just like, thank you for letting me know, this is fantastic. And so that changed the shift for everybody else of like, well, I've got to get with this program now because this is obviously the new norm. So if Michael's okay with it, I have to be okay with it. And I think it was then encouraged that anyone had an idea or concerns could just go straight to Michael. And why wouldn't you go straight to Michael? And that it just shifts. So I think, yes, the older generation have great things to add to society, but so do the younger. And I do a lot of work around the 5 generations in the workplace now. And I always say to the audience, no one generation is the best. Mm. Wherever you're sitting, you might think you're the best, but you're not. You all have something to add. You all have value, but you all have the opportunity to learn from the other generations as well. Mm. So I think everyone has an
going through exactly that right now. As you well know, I support Derby County, and our current manager is filling the team with youngsters, and they're brilliant. They're lovely, great footballers. We've got 6 or 7 19-year-olds, 19, 20, 21-year-olds in the team. But actually, we didn't win a game the first 4 games of the season. On Saturday, he put some of the older heads in, the wiser heads. And what happened? We beat one of the top teams away from home 1-0. And actually, as an analogy, I think that's perfect. You need both. You need both. And it's interesting, Trish, your question was really interesting because Facebook brought in Sheryl Sandberg and she made a real difference to the business, a lot of which we don't know about, according to various things I've been reading. Microsoft now have a very young, sort of energetic, only the 3rd CEO they've ever had after Ballmer and Gates, in Satya Nadella. And if you read his book, I think it's called Reboot or something like that, his vision for Microsoft is completely different to how we see it, how we understand it and where he wants it to go. And I think if you've got somebody in the business, he's grown up within Microsoft and he's developed into this person that wants to lead it somewhere. Facebook did the opposite. They brought somebody else in who was completely different, hadn't the culture around Sandberg is very different. And of course they've got our ex-Liberal leader in there as well, haven't they now? But but it's creating a change at board level. It's creating this different attitude to it, and it's not quite what you're talking about, getting down to the coal face, but it just goes to prove that different methods work. And it is, Rachel's right, it's down to culture. It's down to how you can shift the culture to feel comfortable. And when you were talking about the Michael Dell thing, you made me smile, because I can imagine all these top execs who were working for Michael Dell who would never have dared to have sent something right to Michael Dell. And this young 23-year-old sent something. Oh, Christ, it's more to do with the fact that they've got to get, as you say, get on the program, rather than they think, oh, I think we should shift the culture. Do you see what I mean?
We've been going for probably a little bit longer than we normally do, I'm afraid. So we should probably wrap it up at that.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that one. That was good.
Good. I enjoy them all. So we'll be back here this time sometime soon. So join us again. Bye from me, bye from Brian, bye from Rachel, and we'll see you for episode 9.